Hello, my name is Trenton Birch. Welcome to another webinar on commercial cannabis cultivation that we are doing in partnerships with the good people at Cannavigia, who are a compliance software company. This is the third in the series. If you've missed any of the last ones, you can check them on YouTube. We've got one more which comes up in a few weeks' time, and we will inform you about that. But thanks for being here. I know we've got people from all over the world, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Today we're going to talk about understanding the source. You know, what you put in, you ultimately get out, but it can be very confusing. There are so many different types of strains and genetics and different ways of putting the plants in the ground, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to unpack some of those differentiating factors with some really, really expert people from across the planet. So without further ado, I'd like to bring my guests into the room. In you come, guys. Welcome, welcome. Thanks for being here. So let's, in no particular order of importance, let's go around the room and just introduce yourself. So Brendon, thank you for joining us. You're in Canada. Just let us know who you are, where you're at, and what you do. Well, we're struggling to hear you there. You're on mute, Brendon. I think he's unmuted, Linda. Linda, unmute him. Cool, there we go. Should be good.
Yes, good day to all the listeners and viewers from Canada. We're live today speaking from Ontario, and I'm a cannabis horticulture expert that have worked within the legal cannabis industry throughout Canada. I'm originally a Rastafarian dreadlocks from the Caribbean region, but then moved to Canada for agricultural university and then extended the tentacles throughout Canada within the legal cannabis market from Nova Scotia all the way to the Pacific in Vancouver. So it's a pleasure to be here with you guys to share my knowledge with the crew and the team and the listeners and the viewers so that they can get something meaningful out of this conversation.
Great, Brendon. Thanks for being here. And I mean, you were very active on LinkedIn. That's how we met. And I certainly will be looking you up when I come to Canada because I've seen some of the weed that you grow and it just looks unbelievable. So well done. And also, congratulations on sharing all the knowledge that you do. You create a lot of dialogue on LinkedIn and you give a lot as a grower. And I think that's really, really important. So thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. Right. Let's cross over first over to the east and go over to Switzerland, where we have Elias from Cannavigia. Over to you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Yes, I'm Elias from Switzerland. It's evening right now. My background is cannabis cultivation as well. I used to have my own license in the United States, in Alaska, and then worked a lot in the cannabis industry from California, Nevada, Switzerland, and also was happy to be working in Africa in a few countries. So my background nowadays is more on the compliance side. I really make sure for the GACP part at Cannavigia to help everybody. And also starting material is obviously where everything starts in GACP for the medicinal part. So I'm very happy to be here and hope I can share a lot of knowledge on also the part about the regulation.
Great. Thanks, Elias. Appreciate you being here. Benjamin, over to you. All the way from Humbold.
Hi, my name's Benjamin Lind. Here in California, owner of Humbold Seed Company. My family's been growing and breeding cannabis for 3 generations now. Just been kind of in this industry from a small child, kind of just watching my aunts and my uncles do it, and then it kind of just naturally kind of flowed through me, and now here we are in what's turning into a globally regulated market, and so stoked to be here and stoked to chat about it.
Great, thanks, Benjamin. Kwanda Cuban Zulu is supposed to join us today. He's got stuck and is broken down, so we're trying to get him an Uber and trying to sort him out. So hopefully he'll be able to join us before the end of the session. We're going to start off by talking about seeds. I'd like to know the importance of seeds, how he selects seeds, how he chooses a sort of supplier to get seeds from. Benjamin, I thought maybe as you're the seed guru, maybe it's a good place for for you to start. Tell us about, I appreciate there are different levels of people on this call. There are some growers who have real experience. There'll be other growers who are still fairly new. But just talk to us about the importance of seeds, seed selection, getting them from the right source, and just give us a little bit of insight into the seed industry.
No, respect, Trenton. It all starts from seed. Kind of that's where we all go back, like where I always go back to with folks is it's just whether it's the climate you're growing in, the legality of the country you're growing in or the jurisdiction you're growing in, and then the purpose that you're cultivating these plants for, whether it be personal, something in your backyard that you're looking to find relief for a certain thing, or just kind of curate a certain experience at the end of your season, or if you're a large scale facility looking that has a specific target market that they're trying to hit, or if you're trying to hit a specific applied pharmaceutical input, it really all starts from the genetics, and all those genetics originally come from the seed. So selection of where you're sourcing those seeds from, and the quality of the seeds is.
We have lost Humboldt.
Yeah.
Are you back? No, you're back. You're back.
Yes, the quality of the seeds is paramount for your local bioregion, especially if you're cultivating outdoors. Sourcing seeds from a supplier that understands, ideally sourcing from a local supplier, a local quality supplier, and then also sourcing from a supplier that understands the local environment, so that the genetics that you're going to be growing are going to do well in your environment. You're not going to be in Alaska trying to grow a late season sativa, or you're not going to be in the Caribbean trying to grow like a really short, squat, large bud plant prone to powdery mildew. So kind of understanding the interaction of the seed's genetics and then the environment in which you're going to grow it.
Yeah, great. So we're going to dig into genetics in a bit. But Elias, what is your experience with seed? What are some of the challenges you've had growing with seed? What advice would you give to people who are looking to use seed as a starting point?
First of all, I think seed is where the magic happens. This is where you can discover a new great plant, a new genotype in there. And I think the real trick with the seeds to start with is to select out from a lot of seeds to really find your champion that you're looking for, and also to find that one genotype that also suits your environment in that case. But with seeds, it is very time consuming. And that's one of the big part of it. And the other one is you need to be very organized and also nifty about if you're taking clones to preserve that genetics again for your next round, to when you do your selections. In general, otherwise for crops now when I speak about the medicinal part, where you need to be into a certain corridor of cannabinoids always for that cultivar, then I would not recommend to have a different set of genotypes in your batch. But it's something, I think that's the most fun to grow out a pack of seeds, because you get so many different surprising factors out of it. So it really depends where your production is going or what your main goal is.
So let's just unpack that quickly. So it is, as you say, you get seeds, you pop them. You don't know whether if they're not feminized. There is an excitement to getting bag seed. You throw it in the ground, you see what comes up, and that's quite exciting from a hobbyist or a home grow perspective. Obviously, when we move into the commercial space, it's a completely different conversation. Brendon, are you finding? I'm not sure what the trends are in sort of Canada, but certainly here we pretty much most of our commercial farms do grow from clones for obvious reasons. But do you find that people are still growing from seeds in any commercial facilities, or is it all clones? And we'll talk about clones in a sec.
Very good point. I actually manage over 150-acre odd licensed outdoor facility in Canada. And what I have noticed on the quest of seeds is that when we look at phytopharmaceuticals, we look at the genotype, the phenotype, and the ecotype. So these main sort of three indicators give a wide, broad spectrum as to what the different variables that are in the either climatic condition, either resistant to pest, resistant to diseases, give you a more robust plants that can fight against strong winds, that can be support loaded branches with buds, and different factors comes into play as well in terms of whether the dryness of the area, the early varieties as we're in Canada, so that we finish ahead before the frost. In South Africa, probably before the rainy season.
And in our region before the frost as well.
Yes.
Well, many people don't realize it actually goes below zero in Johannesburg, so we have to factor that in as well.
Yes, absolutely. Anything below 15, below 10 at night time can sort of be detrimental and can even create some form of what we call elongation and support weaker growth and act as a catalyst with these cool temperatures for bud rot, mold, mildew, and what have you not. But back to the subject on the selection in aspect of seeds, all this has to be methodologically done in order to commence operation. And you still have to look at other sort of cannabinol profiling, channeling into what the market is looking for, because you don't want to be growing acreage of cannabis or hemp and you don't have a necessary outlet to offload the bulk harvest that is coming from the field with the cannabinoids within a certain spec and limit that is acceptable to the buyer or to the market at any given point in time. So the research encompasses not only the selection of the seeds, but also the selection of what is happening within the market to provide proper indicators that at the end, the farmer, the individual within the cultivation aspect of the cannabis is able to, keep the supply chain going, so to speak, with the desirable output and material in quality for that designated processor or third-party buyer or end consumer.
And are you finding seeds are being used on a commercial level, or they're just being used to pheno hunt from the beginning?
Both strategies are being implemented.
Okay.
Most common would be the pheno hunt and to do clones. Some facilities tend to like the different variations that come from the seed, because when you have a seed and a clone, you have you might have the same genetic, but you have different root structures on each plant. Whereas with the clone, you have a more fibrous rooted system. And with the seed, you develop more of a tap-rooted system. With the tap-root system, it can access nutrients within the soil profile at various levels. It provides more ground stability in terms of anchor against wind and strong weather and probably other sort of inclement circumstances environmentally. You also have with the fibrous root system, the root system is a little bit more shallow, but because we tend to have a very, our photo period during the summer provides adequate growing condition to keep the cannabis in a sort of vegetative stage for a longer period of time. That fibrous root network runs very deep and can still create a robust plant. that can still sustain these different elements of the weather. But in terms of, genetic resistance, sometimes with the seed, you may end up having more genetic sort of resistance to the environment, pests, as compared to the clones. The clones may be more susceptible at times. So there are pros and cons. However, if you're looking for standardization, if you're looking for to create a homogeneous cultivation system, then you require, the clone structure provide you with less degree of variances or genetic mutation over time, which will allow you more product consistency, more cannabinoid balance, and probably more suited for consistent outcomes in quality.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for that. Let's talk about clones. So, for those of, I hope that everybody on this call at least knows what a clone is. But just in case you don't, essentially they look like this, and there are certain methodologies to actually cloning the plant so that it gets successfully rooted. Well, let's talk about clones and the importance of clones. I mean, we're seeing a lot of clones happening in the South African market for that consistency. Where do you think that's going in terms of market trends? Are we, Benjamin, maybe you can take this one because you obviously provide seeds, and I guess clones is a completely different industry. What is your opinion on the clone market and where it's at the moment?
So yeah, we definitely utilize both. We do, you do a cross of two unrelated genetics and you create, an F1, a very unstable F1 seed group, and then you phenohunt through that group to find your unicorn, or what genetic is functioning best in your environment, producing the cannabinoid profile that you desire, producing the smells that you're looking for. And then you take that winner from that unstable population, and that's where the work begins for the seed production, because then you begin back crossing and selfing that clone, and then the progeny of that clone, in order to develop a very stable seed line that will produce a predictable outcome to the point where it's within the thresholds of even the variants that we see in clones. So you can't really have one without the other for breeding. So to have that very stable seed line, you need the clone, which we see is kind of the standard right now, because kind of to date, seed breeding in general has been, fairly, willy-nilly, as far as just, people just crossing two strains that they're really stoked on. The seeds come out, and the seeds are generally fairly unstable, which has kind of shied some people away from using them in a commercial way. But kind of with further work and further selection, the seeds can, and probably someday will, we've seen in other industries, will replace the clone market eventually, once we get to the point of true breeding F1 hybrids, where you're taking extremely inbred lines of seed lines and then bringing them back together, so that the combination of those genetics only have one predictable outcome, and they have all the benefits of heterosis, even though they're a very homogeneous gene set.
So there's a few things I want to pick up on there. Firstly, for those in the audience who don't know, what is back crossing?
Back crossing is when you would take your clone, your unicorn that you found, that plant that you love the most, and you would take the seeds from that same, because at that point you have that plant and then all its brothers and sisters. You would choose a brother and then breed it into that sister plant. They would create offspring. You would still hold on to that original unicorn cut, and you would take its offspring and back cross it onto it, and then it would take its children, its grandchildren, its great grandchildren, and be back crossing it onto that original cut. So each time you do that, you're increasing the stability to that cut by orders of magnitude. So it's a curve that you're following at that point. So you get diminishing returns, but you're slowly creeping to a more and more stable seed line. And then once you get to three or four generations of back crossing into that original clone, you would begin selfing that clone. So you would choose a new clone. You would phenohunt a new population of seeds from that, from those offspring, from the offspring of the great grandchildren, and you would look for the characteristics of that original clone. So you look for if you liked it, the purple flaking and super frosty and the bag appeal, or you liked the production of CBD or THCV, you would rediscover that kind of same clone in that population or same group, and then you would begin selfing it. So you breed it actually unto itself. So you would take two clones, you would reverse one of them, and then put that pollen onto the donor. So you begin selfing and then phenohunting and then selfing and then phenohunting till you got to a point where 99.9% of the genetics within that group are homozygous.
Yeah. And you mentioned unstable seeds, yeah? So just give us a quick definition on what is an unstable seed.
An unstable seed would be taking like two unrelated populations. So if you took if you took an Afghani plant and crossed it with I guess like Durban poison or something like that. So two very distinctly different populations. You brought them together, you would get a rainbow of outcomes. You would get, not only would you be getting, phenotypes like that original Afghani, you'd be getting phenotypes like the original Durban, and then everything in between.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And just last question before we move on. There are periods of time that are recommended in terms of that process of stabilization. Is there an average? Some people say I hear 5 years, or some people say 7 years, or how long does it take to stabilize a genetic? Is there a specific formula, or is it just kind of how does that work?
Yeah, it's a 5 to 7 cycle process. So once you first identify, because it all depends, just like it depends on the material starting with. So if you're starting with a fairly similar population, say you're crossing like a couple of different OGs or different kind of gassy strains, there's going to be less variation within their offspring. So when you start kind of within what are already established family groups, you can expedite the process of stabilizing the seed. But yeah, usually 5 to 7 cycles is what I would say. But that could be 5 to 7 years, or if you're doing 1 or 2 cycles outdoor, and then in the winter doing another cycle, you could condense it to about like a 2-year process from the original phenohunt.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right, let's move on to the other source, tissue culture, which I know is something that is starting to increase across the globe. Elias, I know you've got some experience in tissue culture. Maybe you could just unpack what tissue culture is. I'm also going to bring this screen up, which kind of gives a bit of an example, from petri dishes, in test tubes, kind of like test tube embryotic beginnings. So just maybe give us a bit of insight into what tissue culture is, how it works, and I think you've got some experience in the space. So just what your thoughts are on it.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah. So tissue culture is basically a little bit from the same background like what we're doing with cloning, but everybody is aware of. What you can do with tissue culture is that you also take a tissue of the plant instead of a whole stem or a shoot of the cannabis plant, and it's smaller. Than in that case you would have those different phases that you showed on the slide there, where you put the little part, it even can be from the meristem or from tissue itself of the plant. And then you would put it into the rooting phase first, and then you add different hormones to introduce a different phase to the plants. Once it is rooted and will be its own plant, it basically starts off as a clone again. Now, the advantage to the cloning is that it's happening more in a sterile environment, that you can also, depending on your techniques, in some way clean the plant from certain diseases or sicknesses that it has on it. So to guarantee a fresh start and go in with more vigor that certain clones can lose over the time when they've been cut from a mother plant multiple times over. That's a little bit in a nutshell. I think it's a deep topic, and I'm not the expert on tissue culture, but
Sure. I mean, any other input from Benjamin or Brendon on tissue culture? Any experience with tissue culture? Are you seeing a trend, a move towards tissue culture?
Yeah, tissue culture has definitely been kind of on the forefront of a lot of the nurseries here in California, just because, you know, in California, we have a fairly large commercial cannabis market, and that kind of was born out of this like I call it the primordial ooze, which was you know, the traditional market. So we had these, like, you know, clones that have been around and have been traded from, you know, just kind of you know, traditional market growers, you know, from one grow to another grow, and along the way they picked up a lot of problems, like a lot of, you know, systemic issues that are kind of, we just usually see in clones, which we don't see in seeds. And those issues are like, yeah, it could be spider mites, could be, you know, systemic powdery mildew. The latest is hop latent viroid, or a lot of the different viruses, mosaic viruses that are starting to pop up in cannabis. And through tissue culture, we can really, you know, clean up those old genetics that, you know, maybe are dudding out. Like, you'll get a cut, you'll grow it up, it'll do pretty well in its vegetative state, but when it goes into flowering, it just really won't do much. It just won't behave like the photos you saw of it grown, you know, 3 or 4 years ago. And through tissue culture, you can really clean up the genetics. You can take it back, like you were saying, Elias, you can really take it back to its primordial state. You can almost revert it back to callus, where it is almost, for all intents and purposes, like an embryo. So it is almost taking it back to seed, and then initiate it, minus all the problems that it had gained over the past 2 decades of being passed around. And you're kind of left with this new, super vigorous, like almost freshly, like, reborn clone that is behaving like it did, you know, 20 years ago.
Great. So great insight. Brendon, are you seeing a trend in your region in terms of tissue culture, and what experience do you have?
Definitely, a lot of the universities, even the one I attended, University of Guelph, have a very strong cannabis tissue culture program, as well as a number of what we call the MSOs, multi-state operators, and even craft cannabis and nurseries around the country that focuses on cleaning up genetics, or either looking for the preservation of old legacy genetics that have done well for patients in the area of stress, anxiety, and depression, and would like to isolate those phenols so that you can preserve them for future use. So you definitely have a lot of pros and cons, more pros than cons. You know, in terms of space limitation, it is very good because you can work in a very small area and store a wide genetic bank with tissue culture, as opposed to other various forms that provide tremendous advantages. You know, however, the practice can be costly. You know, it's not a very cheap cheap practice compared to probably cloning and having moms and stuff, because you require a very sterile environment. You require your agar solution, you require test tubes, you require different, petri dishes and stuff, almost like laboratory. So it do comes at a cost, and in the future we will see how well the benefits outweigh the cost. But definitely for the preservation of the long game, have a genetic bank that for the foreseeable future that can take care of a diverse market that caters for a wide variation of consumer patient segmentation and demographics. Sometimes, what you guys might love in South Africa probably might be different in the Caribbean region, might differ from Thailand, might differ from, California, might differ from coming up to Canada. So each culture within each region and each heritage has its own genetic lineage that can be preserved, so that we don't erode the history and the past, and they can continue to play a pivotal role. In particular, Benjamin would agree that land races and creation of them within the breeding aspect of upgrading local breeds and providing them with more terpene profiles and different cannabinoid profiles that benefits consumers and also adapt to different climatic conditions and pests and diseases, which can be future stored for great use, no matter what probably area, altitude that the plant is grown. But definitely it's an advantage having the science of tissue culture on board, because it strengthens not only the capacity of cultivation, but also the assurance process, the science process, the good production practices, the good collective agricultural practices, good manufacturing practices, because it provides greater level of consistency. It provides greater level of quality outcomes, and that's what we look for in a controlled phytopharmaceutical market where cannabis currently falls under. And it's good news for not only the market and emerging businesses, but for even big pharmaceutical companies, because they can have assurance that they can go through a different process that allows greater form of control throughout of the various stages, minimize losses, and that equates to greater profitability for businesses. So definitely, if in case like greenhouses and your outdoor farms have a catastrophic disaster, and next year you would like to run that similar strain that had just pretty much did very poorly within the field. Your only hope may be tissue culture, especially if you have a large market dependent on that particular strain, and the benefits from saving that strain, washing that tissue, and being able to give it a regenerative growth, a new start. It's nothing compared at having your entire pheno and genetic gone and not being able to be preserved for future use, or in that case for treating different illnesses. Isolate cannabinoids that specifically target patients with cancer, target patients with insomnia, target patients with lack of appetite, target patients with stress, anxiety, depression. So there are always benefits for having a diverse genetic line and pool. As I always tell people, when you first started drinking alcohol, nobody ran for 60% right away. You started off light with a beer, and then you progressed. You know, same with cannabis. There are strains you cannot tell a senior citizen who probably may have other forms of competition. Oh yeah, go ahead, look at 40% THC. You know, sometimes you might want to give them a gradual start, and sometimes we have been seeing in North America the high THC trend has provided strain on the loss of cultivars that would normally be lower THC but offer different therapeutic and medicinal properties. And even those genetics has to be stored for long term once the market starts to evolve and mature and begins to understand that there is more to just probably a high THC, not having THC being monetized completely while ignoring the other benefits and aspect of the plant.
Completely. I want to get into genetics in more details. It's going to take a 1 minute break. So, as you know, we are a cannabis education company. We run a commercial cultivation course, and this is a bit of insight into what that course.
The commercial cannabis cultivation industry is one of the most exciting and dynamic emerging industries in the world. But growing cannabis is an art and a science combined that takes deep experience and technical skills. Our commercial cannabis cultivation course is the most advanced course of its kind in Africa. It is designed for existing cannabis farm staff who need to upskill, hobbyist growers looking to make a career out of growing cannabis, and investors or business personnel looking to expand their knowledge and gain a deeper understanding of what growing commercial cannabis actually is. The course features 6 instructors. I will take you through an overview of the complex industry, and as a team, our aim is to share as much knowledge as possible to try and help you avoid costly mistakes. We run courses in Johannesburg and Cape Town on a regular basis, so please check out our website, cheebaafrica.com. So join us on our next course and let's share, build, and grow this industry together.
So for those of you who are overseas at the moment, Johannesburg or Cape Town might be a bit far, but we do have another course coming up in a few weeks in Johannesburg. If you use this code at checkout commercial20, it gives you 20% off. We've got some amazing people who deliver that course, and it really helps if people are running commercial farms, sharing knowledge, swapping ideas. That's one thing I think we want to see more in the industry, is actually just sharing knowledge. You know, I think we have, you know, we all know what growers' ego is, and we're really trying to stamp that out, especially in developing countries or developing cannabis spaces where it's important that we move this forward as fast as possible and share as much knowledge as possible. So, but let's get into genetics. I know we've kind of touched in and out of it as we've gone along, but I want to really sort of drill down into you know the genetics. It's quite deep and broad, and there's lots of different strains. Elias, before we get into the actual sort of technicality of it, can you give us a bit of an overview of what the genetic value chain is? So where do genetics originate from? Who looks after and protects them? How, when they enter into a farm, who receives them? Who decides what they are? What's the kind of ecosphere that surrounds the sort of genetics industry, so to speak, that feeds the cannabis industry ultimately?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So genetic, as you know, is the starting part of it. Everybody needs it if he wants to start the cannabis industry, if he wants to grow cannabis. So where do you get them from? So we used to have these old websites where they started to sell a lot of seeds, or you get them from a friend. So I think always still in the beginning it was a lot of seeds. As I said, this is where they started, where the magic happened. And also this is where we had a little bit insights before, how you start to breed, how you start to stabilize and get a new genetic. Now there's also a trend when the cannabis market is more emerged, that you have more RTFs, you call them, ready to flower plants. So that are companies that are solely specializing on selling on the genetics, and also can do the first step of propagation of the plants. So to a certain height that the plants are basically ready to flower, and that you, as a commercial producer of cannabis, you just can take those plants and can ditch your veg space that you need, or your moms, so you can probably focus on producing. Then the other part is that we've also touched a little bit before, is there are now more like the genetic banks, for once, that are specifically looking on helping you to start with tissue cultures. There's like a new economics moving around it, where you buy or like you rent the genetic, and on the amount of genetics or how much you produced, that will determine your price for the genetics. Like you rent them, and if they're out of season, you can get a new one. But I think, Benjamin, with the seeds and with everything that you guys do at Humboldt, I think this is the start, and this is the OG part, let's say, from cannabis. So there are really those 3 different parts where it starts. And then once we go further into the value chain, when you now start with seeds, a lot of selection will definitely happen, where we have the pros and cons that also Brendon mentioned in the beginning, versus the taproot that you maybe have, or the vigor compared to a more stabilized clone or genetic that you genotype that you then can work with. And yeah, when you get seeds, it most likely can be a lot of selections. What we also see, when new markets emerge around the globe, people are screaming for genetics always in the beginning. And where, again, obviously seeds is most likely the easiest to transport, to do it legally. There is also a lot of hurdles, be it sometimes phytosanitary certificates that need to be done. So you have this other player in the value chain, that the attestation that you're getting, that for the regulatory part, certificates of origin, COAs that come with it. Basically, as a buyer, sometimes you're out there in the blue, you don't have a contact, it's overseas, and you don't know, is that really a seed company that's not just giving me unstable seeds, and I have a lot of different genotypes afterwards in my field, as Benjamin mentioned before, or do I have really something that is stabilized, that I can work with and don't lose too much time? And now more and more we see, obviously, tissue cultures being shipped overseas or for a long distance, because that's also easier possible than clones. And I think in the US also, what we had before was a lot of clone-only strains, so genotypes that you only got by clones, and that were passed in communities, or also that you couldn't go into a dispensary and buy clones. But as the market is changing, it always changes a little bit, the supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole industry just around genetics. I mean, when I went to actually where I met Benjamin in Spannabis early this year, there were some huge seed companies there. So it is a really big business. I've actually got a few questions we're going to take. First 2 are for you, Benjamin. So how have, this is from Wesley in Johannesburg, how have the mega pheno hunts helped you find standout strains at Humboldt Seeds? That's the first question. And then Organic Mike Will is asking, Benjamin, can you please name a few mold-resistant cultivars from Humboldt Seeds? Powdery mildew was really tough for us in this outdoor season. So those 2 questions, if you could give some insight on that, that'd be amazing. Thanks.
Well, respect. Those are both 2 epic questions, and they go hand in hand. So yeah, the mega pheno hunts that we do in California each year, where we travel from Northern California to Southern California, looking through, giant fields of ganja. I think last year we looked through around 10,000 different plants that we had. We had a library at a farm, at a nursery, that had all of the individual clones from those plants still in their vegetative state. And we traveled through the farms in fall and got to see all the flowering buds. So we got to smell all the buds and look at them and do some kind of on-site testing as well, which was really cool to see, like in real time, just taking a bud off of a plant and seeing what its potency was, seeing what the cannabinoid profile was. So yeah, that kind of, and seeing all the different environments that those farms are in really helps inform us about, with the different disease tolerances of different varieties. So I would say for like disease resistance, like we've found that the blueberry muffin is amazingly disease resistant for powdery mildew and botrytis. Our Dream Queen is also amazingly resistant to powdery mildew and botrytis. I've actually never seen either of those plants with powdery mildew. Knock on wood. But I'm sure there can be an exception. But yeah, so those two varieties are super standouts for that. And yeah, on the pheno hunts, it's just amazing to be walking through those fields with like a crew of people, and people from like, all different walks of life, like people with like heavy experience within the industry to people that, are kind of a little bit newer to the industry, and seeing everybody's perspective kind of come shining through. And one of the funnier things is at the end of the day, you really see kind of the natural, like it's almost like natural selection. You'll see everybody kind of congregating around certain plants, and whether it's the plants attracting us or us just identifying as a group, like which plants are the standout winners. You're kind of just at the end of the day, after we've filled out all these questionnaires, we've gone through with clipboards, we've tested bazillion plants. At the end of the day, there'll be 10 or 12 people just gathered around the one unicorn, and everybody's kind of like, oh, this is obviously the winner. So that's always pretty interesting to see. But yeah, the pheno hunts are great. This year we're doing kind of even kind of bigger and better one from years past. I think we're going to be looking at over probably around 20 different farms here in California, traveling from NorCal to SoCal. It's amazing to see
sounds like a terrible job, Benjamin. Terrible job.
It's cool to see the differences from like the lines that we've worked and the stability of those lines versus the lines that are like we've specifically bred just for the pheno hunt. So the ones where you're seeing like 15 different phenotypes to the ones where you're seeing 1,000 plants that can all go into the same bag.
Yeah, great. Cool, thanks for that. Another question from Vikram. I think this one I'm going to give it to you, Brendon. It's slightly off the topic, but I think it's important. The use of chemicals and pesticides, is that still a norm or consciousness towards organic cannabis cultivation in sort of America, etc.? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, based on the compliance structure and framework within its the regulation in the North American system, here in particular in Canada or under Health Canada, there is an approved list of pesticides that can be used within cannabis cultivation. However, coming from a Rastafarian agrarian community and a Caribbean farmer, I believe in the use of organic practices, and probably even going semi-organic, more or less using even predators. We use a lot of predators here predator bugs here in Canada in our integrated pest management systems. Schwartzkys and Oreos and a whole different wide array dependent on the disease that you may experience, or your setup in the different areas. If you're in hydroponic system and you're affected probably quite often by fungus nets and different parasitic sort of nematodes will help get rid of these issues. So I tend to be more on the organic side, even like a tropical area, Johannesburg. We always go down there to play cricket with the West Indies, very popular in the olden days with in South Africa. And some of the herbs that can be grown like ginger, garlic, all these things that can be used in the environment and can be created into a sort of solutions do have a powerful effect against resisting bugs as probably just supposed to be using chemicals. Because at the end of the day, with every standardization system and that has to undergo testing, there has to be a certain limit or residual sort of chemical that can be present within the cannabis for safe public consumption. And with that in mind, you tend to have not putting public health at risk. For example, if South Africa looking to penetrate and be GMP certified and get access to European market, all these things has to be taken into consideration where the use of chemicals is being deployed and at what rate and what dose, and is it approved under the regulatory framework of the jurisdiction? What other side effect that it may have on the environment, and how that may impact in terms of the water table, the living soil organisms, that helps us to create more of a healthy balance within organic or outdoor farming for sustainable land use practices.
Yeah, you don't have to convince me. I'm completely anti-pesticide at all levels. I mean, if you look at the approved pesticides we have for our food that have been poisoning us for decades, I think it would be a travesty for us to allow any pesticides into cultivating our cannabis. We all know that cannabis is a bioaccumulator. It sucks everything in. We often have no idea what happens when we combust the cannabis if it's being used in smokable format. So, my wish and my desire is to keep cannabis as clean as possible. It's not just about making as much money as possible. This is a product or a plant which is supposed to be benefiting our health, and using pesticides, I think, is sacrilege. So that's my personal opinion. You're all entitled to yours, but don't give me any of your weed if it's got pesticides in it. I will not touch it.
And it must be said to strengthen the point that there's also a debate in North America as well in terms of even the heavy use of nutrients, and pesticide as well. They could leave some of a harshness or taste within the cannabis itself, and even lengthening the sort of chlorophyll content, which has to undergo breakdown. So therefore, it impacts flavor, it impacts taste, and if it skews an entire batch or a lot under the legal framework or system, that could have a detrimental impact on the consumer profiling for return customers. Providing that you're not meeting them with the consistent outcome in terms of quality that they're repeatedly looking for.
Well, I invite you guys to Switzerland, because when we did our pilot projects now, it needs to be organic from the fertilizers, pest management, everything. So that's, I think, is also a cool step. Some people don't like it, but I'm the same. I like my weed without pesticides on it.
Without crap in it. Guys, we've got a few more minutes left, so I want to just do a quick run round. First of all, I want you to, if you can, because I know it's not so easy, to name as your favorite strain. You can have two as well if you like, because one might be tough. Have a think about that, and then just quickly outlining some potential trends you see in the sort of genetics source industry. Ben, let's start with you, bud.
Favorite strain, classic old school OG Kush is definitely probably one of my favorites, and then some of the new school, like the blueberry pancakes, is probably my second favorite, as well as like anything heritage, like any of like the land race or just the old world stuff that we had, like our aunts and uncles and the generation before us was smoking. I love that stuff. And then trends that we're seeing here in California, we're definitely seeing like a move toward globalization of cannabis. It's a commodity crop. This is kind of what everyone's talking about. Everyone from Jamaica, Colombia, Thailand, Germany, all over the EU, everyone is beginning to grow, and so it's a very interesting time. It's a very interesting time to see, what genetics are working, and we're seeing a huge push in the pharmaceutical industry for APIs, things that are like cannabinoids and cannabinoid ratios and other different cannabis, products, terpenes or etc. that can fit into the box of an API. So, there's been a lot of work done around some of the minor cannabinoids, CBN, CBG. We've been doing a lot of work, and a couple other groups have been doing a lot of work around THCV, which is super promising for potentially replacement of some low-level stimulants that people tend to consume a lot on a daily basis. So there's a big opportunity for potentially like disrupting caffeine and different other nicotines with THCV. Things that make you focused, make you alert. Make you not hungry. It turns out to. So skinny weed, I think, is on the horizon.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Benjamin. Appreciate that. Elias, favorite trends you might see in Europe? I know Europe's hopefully about to boom. We're all waiting with bated breath.
I keep it short, but for me, it's also classical OG. Be OG 18, it was, I think, still all time works for me. Then on the other side, definitely everything that's on the lower THC level, so around 18, and a lot of terps. That's the interesting part, and everything more on the classic side for me also. I mean, I love the new taste. Sorry?
Yeah, no, carry on.
Yeah, the new tastes are phenomenal that I see coming from the US. I think that's where most of it is happening right now, also in terms of genetics. We had a lot of genetics going on the low THC part, CBD part, that was big in Europe for the last few years, since we weren't allowed to do recreational cannabis. And on the THC side, nowadays, I see for the medicinal market in Europe, the trend is going, it's still a lot of the old strains that are around, but everybody is looking a little bit more towards the US and to get those little bit more juicier strains over to Europe. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Elias. We haven't talked much about landrace strains actually in this session. We have a lot of landrace strains coming out of South Africa, Durban Poison being one that Benjamin mentioned, and lots more. So if you'd like to buy some weed from us or some strains from us, we will happily oblige. Brendon, your favorite strain at the moment, and just some quick tips on things you're seeing happening in the industry.
I would definitely have to go with the Kush as well, and the OGs. Those are always made out of India and Afghanistan, the Asia sort of continent, and even with the latest strains that normally comes into play within the US market and in the markets here with Canada, with crossing a lot of the old school heritage genetics. The fruity ones are also very popular. A lot of lemonine, terpene that resembles lime, orange, citrus, grapefruit. Tends to have a sort of more calming and relaxing but uplifting and long-lasting sort of high, which is good for patients, so you're not medicating ever so often. It holds the sort of meditation, so to speak, and those are becoming sort of more popular and more favored. But it's dependent on each individual, because we all have different endocrine system. We all react differently to cannabis, and sometimes what may one consumer get one consumer stoned and high probably may not get another consumer stoned and high, dependent on how much probably available cannabinoids that is already in your bloodstream for being a long-term smoker or being a long-term consumer. So there are different predisposing factors that comes into play when providing the sort of upliftment that you're looking for. But definitely, I always say go with the ones that keep you calm, keep you mellow, keep you, and also I believe having a medicine chest. So there are days that you come home and you probably have to look over to the kids, and you don't want to have something that's too strong. Especially keeping them unattended, especially if they are at very young ages. If you're pretty much stressed, there are different ones that probably might be more high in arresting stress and anxiety. Also, if you're looking for, if you cannot sleep at night and have trouble sleeping, then those for insomnia probably might work a little bit best. So it's also mood dependent, and what sort of mood and attitude that you at the moment, and what altitude that you're deciding to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Brendon, thanks for that. I'm enjoying Miracle Alien Cookies at the moment. It's something I discovered recently. So the Mac is a great strain. Guys, thank you so much. I was actually concerned that we'd run out of stuff to talk about, but we could actually go on for ages. It's such a deep topic, and I really sincerely appreciate you all being here. Apologies that Cuban Zulu couldn't make it. He broke down, and when you break down in Johannesburg, you need to focus on getting yourself sorted out on our mean streets. So sorry that he wasn't here. I'd like to thank my producer, Linda Saborto, for being here and making sure that everything is nice and slick. Guys, thank you so much. The rerun will be on YouTube, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, have a great afternoon, evening, daytime, wherever you are. We are out. Ciao.